Celebrities and scandals go side by side, but sometimes the scandals are so severe that even Hollywood tries to hide it. This is what happened in some of the scandals that Hollywood totally covered up. The last one is so gruesome that it will make your jaws drop, so stay tuned and watch till the end. 1. George Reeves. You ever watch those old black and white Superman episodes from the 1950s? You know, the ones that felt almost quaint compared to today's special effects? Well, the hero in question was George Reeves, a man who brought the Man of Steel to life for countless kids across America. People loved him as Superman because he was the face of morality and strength on TV. But on June 16, 1959, everything came crashing down. Reeves was discovered dead from a gunshot wound, and while officials deemed it a self-done, a cluster of folks in Hollywood just didn't buy it. Rumors swirled about killing. Friends recalled that Reeves had been in high spirits leading up to his death, making wedding plans, talking about his future, and not exactly fitting the mold of someone on the brink of taking his own life. Then there's the Toni Mannix angle, the wife of MGM exec Eddie Mannix. Toni and George had been romantically involved, and Eddie Mannix was rumored to have some heavy ties to the mafia. Some people think Eddie arranged a hit, or that Toni might have confessed some involvement, but the details are murky, especially since she had Alzheimer's disease later in life. The official story? Self-inflicted gunshot. The conspiracy theory? A Hollywood case hushed up. Now, unless someone stumbles on a hidden diary or confesses on their deathbed, that's probably all we'll ever know. Yet the fascination remains. Did Hollywood's first Superman really die by his own hand? Or was it something far more sinister? Second, Fatty Arbuckle. Switching gears to the silent era, let me tell you about Fatty Arbuckle. Yes, that's a name that might ring a bell if you've dipped your toes into silent film history. He was a comic genius who could make audiences roar with laughter without speaking a single word on camera. At the peak of his fame, though, he wound up behind bars, accused of ending a young actress named Virginia Rapp. Now, the accusation was that he'd assaulted her, causing her bladder to rupture. No small claim, especially back in the day. Arbuckle insisted he was innocent. An autopsy didn't find evidence of assault, and his legal team argued that Rapp had long-standing bladder problems, but the scandal alone was enough to decimate his career. You see, Hollywood was already starting to get paranoid about public image, and an actor entangled in a trial is about as bad as it gets. He was eventually acquitted, 3 trials later, in fact, but the damage was irreversible. Studios didn't want to touch him, audiences gave him the cold shoulder, and his star power fizzled out. In many ways, he became Hollywood's cautionary tale. Get tangled in scandal, and the industry shuts its doors on you, even if you're found not guilty in a court of law. 3. Natalie Wood's death. Now let's talk about Natalie Wood. Imagine, you're an actress terrified of water, can't swim to save your life, yet you decide to go on a little boating trip around Catalina Island with your husband Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, and a captain named Dennis DeVerne. Doesn't sound like something you'd do if water truly frightened you, right? But maybe she was just trying to face her fears or relax with friends. Tragically, her body was found about a mile away from the boat. There were bruises on her arms, a notable abrasion on her cheek. Yet the official cause of death remains accidental drowning. That alone raises eyebrows. Could it be that she slipped while trying to climb into a dinghy? Maybe she got in an argument with Robert Wagner, stormed off, and something happened. Wagner himself admitted they'd argued that night, though nobody knows precisely how intense it got. Some folks whisper about conspiracies, alleging that higher-ups, even Ronald Reagan of all people, helped hush the truth. The notion is that, because Hollywood folks have so many connections in government and the police, the real story was covered up to protect reputations. Today, official records say it was an accident, but we'll likely never get a full explanation for those bruises and that abrasion. Did she really just slip and fall? Or was she pushed? It's the kind of mystery that keeps the tabloids spinning decades later, fueling speculation that there was far more to that night than a mere nautical mishap. Celebrity abortion protocols. Old Hollywood was notorious for controlling every aspect of their starlets' lives, from the way they walked, talked, and dressed, to whether they could marry or even have children. The studios saw these actresses as their investments. If an actress became pregnant, they often had one cruel option: forced termination. "We can't halt the product. Schedule for 9 months just because our star is pregnant," they might say. So to protect their bottom line and the woman's sellable image as a glamorized star, the studio would quietly whisk her away for a while, hush up the real reason for her absence, and bring her back to set, expecting her to be business as usual. There's heartbreak in that. These women didn't have a choice. Their contracts locked them in so tightly that if they defied the studio, they risked losing everything: roles, income, reputation. The emotional and physical toll must have been harrowing, but who could they tell? The public? The tabloids? It would have caused a massive scandal. So they stayed silent, enduring a trauma no one should ever have to experience, just to keep the illusion of Hollywood beauty and perfection alive. Dark stuff. 5. Judy Garland's entire career. Judy Garland. Just saying her name might make you think of the Wizard of Oz or that unforgettable voice singing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." She was a once-in-a-generation talent, but behind that big smile and powerhouse vocals was a woman who faced relentless pressure from her studio bosses. Think about it. She started young, signing with MGM as a teenager, and they had the power to dictate her daily life. They fed her drugs to keep her awake for long shooting days, gave her barbiturates at night so she could sleep, and manipulated every aspect of her existence to maximize their profits. Judy was forced to maintain a specific weight and look, endure inhuman hours, and deal with the lecherous behavior of executives like Louis B. Mayer, who reportedly groped her while she was still just a young star. She soared on screen, bright and full of vivacity, but off camera, she was kept in a perpetual cycle of stimulants and sedatives. It's no wonder she struggled with addiction, and at just 47, she passed away with dubious circumstances. It was an end that many say was practically orchestrated by the studio system that exploited her. She gave the world so much joy and wound up crushed beneath the weight of Hollywood's monstrous machine. 6. Alfred Hitchcock. You love thrillers, right? Chances are you've seen an Alfred Hitchcock film or two, maybe Psycho or The Birds. Hitchcock has been hailed for pioneering suspenseful cinema. But Tippi Hedren, star of The Birds and Marnie, would tell you that the man behind the camera wasn't always the lovable cinematic genius people claimed. She recounted how Hitchcock was dangerously possessive, forbidding anyone on set from interacting with her unless he approved it. He allegedly stalked her, had her handwriting analyzed, and demanded that his assistants watch her every move to ensure she wasn't getting romantically involved with anyone else. It's a controlling, manipulative pattern we see in toxic relationships, but this was the great Alfred Hitchcock. Who would dare challenge him in that era? Tippi said it went even further, that he touched her inappropriately. On some sets, directors can behave like demigods, and if you speak up, your career can vanish. So Tippi stayed quiet for years, likely out of fear that no one would believe her. Only in recent times has the narrative shifted, allowing these stories to surface. Now, when we watch those iconic Hitchcock films, we might wonder how many sinister moments behind the scenes got brushed aside for the sake of cinematic history? CELEB Woody Allen. It's not a secret that Woody Allen is a controversial figure. People have praised him for quirky intellectual films like Annie Hall or Midnight in Paris. But behind that persona lies a torrent of allegations, the most chilling being the one involving his adopted daughter, Dylan Farrow. In 1992, Allen was accused of molesting Dylan when she was a minor. While no criminal conviction happened, there were indications even back then that something was off. A judge found Allen's behavior concerning, and he'd reportedly been in therapy for inappropriate conduct toward Dylan even before the allegations broke. The scandal grows darker when you recall that Allen later married Soon-Yi Previn, the adopted daughter of his then-partner Mia Farrow. He claims he never helped raise Soon-Yi, but to many that's just plain disturbing. Folks in Hollywood have largely avoided the topic for decades. Some maintain that we should separate art from the artist, while others, especially Dylan Farrow herself, continue to speak out, saying we should acknowledge what really happened. It's a debate that's never fully settled, and the deeper you dig, the murkier it gets. 8. Jimmy Savile, a horror story in plain sight. Now, I need to take you across the pond to the United Kingdom. Jimmy Savile wasn't a Hollywood mogul, but he was a massive broadcasting personality, practically revered for his charity work and that iconic show, Jim'll Fix It, where kids would write in their dreams and he'd make them come true on TV. Everyone adored him, until it all fell apart after his death. In 2011, Savile passed away, and he was practically canonized as a saint in some corners. But 1 year later, a documentary revealed a grotesque pattern of abuse. Savile had used his celebrity to molest children and adults in hospitals, psychiatric facilities, even his own show's set. We're talking hundreds of victims, ranging in age from 5 to 75. The scale of his crimes is almost too horrifying to believe. The real kicker? There were rumors swirling around him for decades, yet the BBC and other institutions seemingly ignored them. They chalked up any complaint about nonsense or scurrilous gossip, never wanting to tarnish the brand of their beloved star. It's not just a Hollywood problem. This is proof that show business, wherever it is, can foster an environment where predators thrive, especially when the powers that be find it more convenient to ignore the truth. 9. Loretta Young, adopting her own child. Loretta Young, another name from Hollywood's golden era, she had the grace and beauty that made her a star. But behind that serene exterior lay a harrowing secret. She became pregnant, allegedly due to a non-consensual encounter with Clark Gable. The story goes that on set for The Call of the Wild, Gable forced himself on her. In those days, an unwed pregnant actress faced career ending. So what did Loretta do? She vanished for months only to return with an adopted daughter, Judy. The truth, though, is that Judy was her biological child with Gable, hidden away to protect both their reputations. That's how twisted Hollywood's system was. An actress couldn't even reveal her own pregnancy without risking the end of her career. Only decades later did Loretta reveal that what happened with Gable was far from a romantic fling. It was date rape, as she described it. We can't imagine the weight she bore all those years, hiding her daughter's true parentage from the world. It's easy to watch their movies and think, wow, the golden age was so glamorous. But just beneath that shiny exterior, heartache, shame, cover-ups, and complete disregard for these women's emotional well-being. 10th Clark Gable's alleged hit and run. Now let's rewind back to one of the biggest names in classic Hollywood, Clark Gable. You remember him from Gone with the Wind, that charming rogue with a killer smile. Everyone saw him as a paragon of masculinity, the king of Hollywood. But rumor has it there was a dark incident lurking in his past. Allegedly, Gable was involved in a fatal hit-and-run accident. Imagine that, a beloved star caught up in a crime that claimed life. If you believe the rumors, MGM, eager to protect their moneymaker, pulled some shady moves. Some say they greased the right palms, bribed local authorities, and pinned the blame on a lesser-known studio employee. Essentially, they traded someone else's future to keep Gable's stardom intact. Whether that's 100% true or not, we'll probably never know. Records can disappear, people get intimidated into silence, especially in that era. But it speaks volumes about how far studios would go to keep their golden geese unscathed. If Gable truly was behind the wheel that night, it's a dark secret that the public never learned in full, overshadowed by that famous line, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Well, if the rumor has any merit, it sounds like MGM didn't give a damn either, except about their profits and reputation. 11. The mysterious death of Thelma Todd. Step back to 1935. Thelma Todd, a bright comedic actress known for her fun roles in Marx Brothers films, was found dead under pretty bizarre circumstances. She was in her car, in a garage, and the cause of death? Carbon monoxide poisoning. The official verdict, maybe it was an accident or something else. But was it? Here's the puzzle. Todd was a rising star, had a successful cafe business on the side, and didn't exactly fit the profile of someone planning to end it all. Some suspect she crossed the wrong people, possibly mobsters. There were claims she was involved with shady figures, or that she'd refused certain demands. You know how Hollywood and the mob sometimes did a little dance together? Many suspect that Todd was ended, yet the studios had zero interest in fueling a scandal that could point toward criminal elements meddling with their star. So, conveniently, the official story was that she locked herself in her car and succumbed to the fumes. End of tale. Yet decades later, we're still wondering, was she forcibly kept in that garage? Did someone whack her and stage the scene? Her death remains one of those unsolved Hollywood curiosities that begs to be a film noir plot all on its own. 12. Shirley Temple's harassment as a child star. Shirley Temple, just the mention of her name conjures images of a tiny curly-haired girl singing on the good ship Lollipop. She was beloved globally, a symbol of wholesome childhood innocence, especially during the Great Depression. And you'd think nobody would dare harm that sweet child star, right? Unfortunately, Hollywood can warp even the purest images. Later in life, Shirley Temple spoke out about how at age 12, she was subjected to inappropriate advances by movie producers. Let that sink in. A 12-year-old. She brushed them off at the time, apparently not fully comprehending the twisted intent, but it's beyond disturbing. The studio system likely knew these men had a thing for young girls, but they brushed it aside because, well, the show must go on. It's infuriating to say the least. As audiences, we saw a smiling little girl dancing on screen, never imagining that behind the scenes she could be dealing with lecherous executives. It's a reminder that exploitation in show business isn't new. It's been around for as long as cameras have rolled. And Shirley, bless her heart, had to navigate these murky waters without the support or safeguards you'd hope a child performer would receive. 13. Loretta Young and Clark Gable's secret child. We touched on Loretta Young earlier, but let's expand this angle a bit, because her story intersects with Clark Gable's in a way that rattled Hollywood's carefully curated illusions. So as I said, she had a child with Clark Gable. He was older, married, the definition of a superstar. She was a rising star, devout Catholic, and painfully conscious of how the press would react to an out-of-wedlock pregnancy. That's why the entire ordeal was masked by a fake adoption. Everyone marveled at how charitable Loretta was, taking in a baby. Little did the public know that it was her own flesh and blood. Gable knew about the pregnancy but never publicly claimed the child. Studios even quietly cooperated with hush-hush relocations for Loretta to keep things discreet. You have to wonder, how does that shape a child's psyche, knowing your mother is secretly your mother and your father is an unreachable screen legend who can never acknowledge you publicly? It's a Hollywood heartbreak if there ever was one. In the end, though, it highlights the power of morality clauses in studio contracts and the overarching fear these stars had of being disgraced. Morality clauses didn't protect them from actual moral harm. It just shielded the studio from bad press. 14. Spencer Tracy's secret life. Here's a name that exudes classic Hollywood elegance. Spencer Tracy. He was one of the most respected actors of his time, revered for roles in everything from Captain's Courageous to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. On the surface, he appeared the devout Catholic family man, married to Louise Treadwell. But behind the curtain, he wrestled with his own demons. For one, Tracy had a famous long-term affair with Katharine Hepburn. Everyone in Hollywood kind of knew, but it was officially kept under wraps because Tracy remained married, never divorcing his wife, likely due to the complexities of religion, guilt, and Hollywood public relations. On top of that, he struggled with alcoholism, which studios worked tirelessly to conceal. He'd disappear on benders, show up late, or not at all, but the fixers were always at the ready. MGM, especially under Louis B. Mayer, specialized in spin control. They'd release a carefully worded statement, maybe something about exhaustion or minor illness, and hush the rest. To this day, many fans prefer the pristine, publicly presented version of Tracy, but in truth, he lived a life riddled with secrecy, heartbreak, and the constant pressure to appear saintly when he felt anything but. 15. Joan Crawford's alleged abusive behavior. Next up, Joan Crawford, named the queen of the movies at one point. On screen, she was a powerhouse, often playing strong-willed women. Off-screen, though, her adopted daughter, Christina Crawford, penned the now infamous memoir, Mommy Dearest, accusing Joan of being a cruel and abusive mother. Christina's stories are harrowing: whippings, screaming fits, meticulous rules about cleanliness, and a general reign of terror. She described wire hangers as a focal point of Joan's rage, among many other shocking behaviors. So was this pure truth, or an exaggeration from a bitter daughter? We might never know the full extent, but what we do know is that Hollywood and the public had trouble reconciling the glamorous star with the monstrous mother described in those pages. Studios definitely didn't want that image to get out. The brand was always that Crawford was a devoted mother who'd opened her heart to adopted children. When the book came out, a lot of Joan's fans felt betrayed. Others claimed Christina was out for revenge or money. No matter where the truth lies, the memoir undeniably tarnished Crawford's legacy, unveiling the possibility that beneath the diamond-studded facade, there lurked a deeply troubled individual. 16th Rock Hudson's AIDS diagnosis. Rock Hudson was the embodiment of Hollywood's leading man in the 1950s and 60s. Tall, handsome, charming in roles alongside the likes of Doris Day. Women swooned and men admired him, but Hudson lived a closeted life. By the 1980s, he was suffering from a then little-understood disease, AIDS. In that era, AIDS was loaded with stigma. People called it the gay plague, and those diagnosed were often ostracized. Rock Hudson hid his illness for as long as he could. Hollywood as a system hid it too. Publicly, he was said to be dealing with other health issues, but the truth couldn't stay buried forever. When it came out that he had AIDS, it was a monumental moment. Suddenly, the epidemic had a famous face. He was flown to Paris for treatment, and photos emerged of him looking gaunt, a shadow of his former self. It shocked the world. His close friend Doris Day recalled he was the same sweet man he'd always been, but the industry was so spooked by the ramifications. If a masculine star like Hudson was secretly gay, what else had the public been misled about? Hudson passed away in 1985, and though the coverage was enormous, Hollywood had already tried to hush it up for as long as possible. His diagnosis and death ended up sparking awareness for AIDS, but we can't forget how fear and secrecy shaped those final chapters of his life. 17. Judy Garland's studio-controlled addiction. Yes, I know we already talked about Judy Garland, but it's worth zeroing in on the specifics of her studio-controlled addiction because it's a scandal unto itself. MGM discovered early on that Judy was talented beyond words, but she didn't fit their standard glamour girl mold. She wasn't tall enough, wasn't slim enough, wasn't the typical blonde bombshell. So they allegedly put her on a regimen of diet pills to keep her weight down, uppers to keep her energetic all day, and downers to make her crash at night. In other words, they manipulated her body chemistry from her teenage years onward, all in the name of profit. Sometimes she'd be forced to dance or sing for hours, well past exhaustion, only to pop another pill that would jolt her awake again. Is it any wonder she struggled with substance abuse for the rest of her life? Years later, colleagues would remark on how sad it was to see this remarkable woman so controlled by medication and external pressures. She wanted to be healthy, she wanted to be happy. But if you're dealing with a system where your paycheck and your career rely on compliance, your personal well-being goes out the window. Eventually, it culminated in that tragic overdose. And while Judy's name shines in cinematic history, we must remember how the environment she was locked into pushed her toward that tragic end. 18. Charlie Chaplin's relationship with girls. Charlie Chaplin, silent film legend, comedic genius, the tramp. The man revolutionized comedy and filmmaking, so much so that he's still revered around the world. But Chaplin's private life was a tangled web. He married multiple times, and on more than one occasion, those brides were under 18. One especially jarring instance, he was in his 50s when he married a 16-year-old girl. If that happened today, the outcry would be immediate and career-ending. But back then, it was a rumor that studios either brushed off or spun in some romantic, paternalistic narrative. Chaplin had a reputation for romancing teenage girls, a predilection that's disconcerting to say the least. Did the public know? Not to the extent we do now, because the studio system had well-oiled PR machines. They could rewrite any scandal or simply bury it under the next big headline. People who might speak out were often contractually gagged or threatened with legal or physical repercussions. Chaplin himself faced paternity suits and legal battles, but none that fully sank his enormous legacy. Even today, you can mention this dark side and some fans will wave it away, focusing solely on comedic brilliance. But the truth is, these relationships were not mere gossip. They reflected a darker pattern that Hollywood at large helped conceal. 19. Bob Crane's ending. Bob Crane, ring any bells? He starred in Hogan's Heroes, that sitcom about prisoners of war in a German camp. Off-screen, Crane led a life that was something of an open secret, a fascination with amateur adult videos and a penchant for sexual escapades, often recorded. In 1978, he was found bludgeoned to death in his Arizona apartment. The investigation unearthed a library of tapes and revelations about Crane's double life, including a close friend who might have been involved. Hollywood had no interest in diving into the sordid details. They distanced themselves, leaving the case overshadowed by sensational headlines, but never giving it the scrutiny one might expect for a well-known TV star. The case went cold for years. Though his friend John Henry Carpenter was eventually tried, he was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. Nobody else was charged. It's a baffling whodunit with rumors that someone in Crane's tapes might have had motive. But to keep up appearances, the industry just sort of shrugged, whispered about it behind closed doors, and let the case fade from public consciousness. Another example of how real life can be darker and more twisted than any script. 20. Lana Turner's boyfriend. Here's some classic Hollywood drama for you. Lana Turner, the blonde bombshell, found herself in the middle of a headline-grabbing homicide in 1958. Her lover, Johnny Stompanato, was found dead in her home. Who was the killer? Lana's teenage daughter, Cheryl Crane. Cheryl did it to protect her mother from Stompanato's abuse. He was allegedly beating Lana, threatening her life. Fearing for her mother, Cheryl grabbed a knife. Law enforcement eventually deemed it justifiable homicide. Case closed, right? Well, some people suspect Lana herself might have wielded that knife or played a bigger role than she let on. Others think the studios helped shape the narrative, leaning on the tragic innocence of a teenager defending her mom. Why would Hollywood hush it up or spin it? Lana was a moneymaker. Her scandal threatened to disrupt film schedules, brand deals, and all sorts of carefully cultivated illusions. So the entire fiasco got a quick wrap-up. Whether that's the whole truth might never be known. But it's chilling to think how a star's real-life drama rivaled anything on the silver screen, and how the studio system could orchestrate the message to keep the star's image as intact as possible. 21st, Marlon Brando's son and daughter's tragedies. Marlon Brando, talk about a titan of acting. He gave us legendary performances in A Streetcar Named Desire, The Godfather, and so many others. Yet while the cameras loved Brando, his personal life was a whirlpool of heartbreak and turmoil. His son, Christian, made headlines when he was convicted of manslaughter in the shooting of his half-sister, Cheyenne's boyfriend. Then Cheyenne herself tragically took her own life. Hollywood mostly avoided the tragedies unfolding in Brando's family. Nobody wanted to dwell on the personal anguish of a man revered as an acting god. But it highlighted that stardom doesn't shield you from personal demons or heartbreak. Behind Brando's method acting mastery was a father struggling with a fractious family life, addiction issues, and the weight of fame. Studios and publicists tiptoed around these topics. Better to focus on his next film, they'd say, rather than the sorrow in his personal affairs. For Brando, it was devastating. He tried to keep family matters private, but such high-profile incidents can't remain hidden forever. It's a cruel reminder that personal tragedies can't always be masked by accolades and trophies. Even the greatest luminaries in Hollywood might be battling storms that no blockbuster success can calm. 22. The casting couch culture. Now let's land on a topic that's both as old as Hollywood and as current as the Me Too era, the infamous casting couch. For decades, really almost a century, women in Hollywood have whispered about being expected to trade sexual favors for roles, promotions, or a shot at stardom. People like Marilyn Monroe hinted at it, and many young starlets had harrowing stories of meeting with powerful producers or directors who implied that if they didn't comply, their careers would be over before they began. Instead of confronting this systemic abuse, studios largely ignored it. The hush-hush attitude served everyone at the top. Powerful men kept their power. The studios kept producing hits. Meanwhile, countless women suffered in silence, some leaving the industry in disgust, others just enduring because they saw no other way. In recent years, high-profile cases, Harvey Weinstein being a prime example, ripped the lid off this culture. But the old Hollywood tradition goes way back, embedded in the framework of an industry that prized money and box office hits over human dignity. Whenever I hear folks wax nostalgic about the good old days of Hollywood, I can't help but recall that for many women, it was anything but good. It was exploitative, often predatory, and dangerously lopsided in terms of power. That's the real story behind the glimmering curtain. 23rd, Errol Flynn's underage affairs. Let me tell you about Errol Flynn. Picture him in his swashbuckling roles, sword in hand, grin on his face, the epitome of daring romance in classics like The Adventures of Robin Hood. Off-screen, though, Flynn was known to be quite a scandal magnet. He was charming, sure, but perhaps too charming for his own good. In the early 1940s, Flynn was accused of statutory offenses involving underage girls. That went to trial, and he was acquitted. But the rumors didn't stop. They swirled that Flynn had a penchant for teenage lovers, a habit that was brushed under the rug by the studios who needed him to keep that heroic, adventurous image alive. People in Hollywood at the time, from executives to fellow actors, whispered about it, but officially, nobody wanted to drag it into the light. After all, he was a bankable star, and the fans loved him. Scandals break illusions, and illusions are big business. He drank heavily, partied like there was no tomorrow, and left a trail of broken hearts, some allegedly too young to truly consent. The question that lingers is, if we had modern media and social platforms back then, would Flynn have been canceled overnight? Probably. But in that era, a great lawyer, a bit of hush money, and a studio machine backing, you could wipe your rap sheet clean, at least in the public eye.